Blue, Krama, and Mullen, the authors of the textbooks of the scores in Kenya, try to answer the question: is providing textbook an effective tool of public policy in developing countries? Throughout the paper, the authors analyzes and evaluates the impact of textbook and grants provision program practiced by Kenyan government in 1995. And before we jump into the analysis of the program, we will first look at the backgrounds of the context. In 1995, the Ministry of Education of Kenya selected 100 schools from 333 primary schools in Busia and Tasso districts based on the following criteria: the needs of support, the history of previous grants or support, and the performance of school on the district exam. These schools are then randomly separated into 4 groups, 25 schools per each group. The textbooks or grants to the textbooks were then transferred to each group sequentially. In the early 1996, grade 3 to 7 of group 1 received English textbooks, grade 3, 5, and 7 received math textbooks, and grade 8 received science textbooks. In the early 1997, grade 4 and 6 of group 1 received math textbooks, and grade 8 received agriculture textbooks. And in the same year, Group 2 received grants to purchase those textbooks. In the early 1998, Group 3 received the grants, and in 2000, Group 4 received the grants. Baseline tests, which we will refer as pre-tests, were conducted only to Group 1 and Group 4, and additional exams are conducted at the end of each program year to those not taking the district exam, so that we can evaluate the effect of the program. With this context, at the end of year 1, Group 1 can be compared with Group 2, 3, and 4, and in year 2, it can be compared with Group 3 and 4, and in year 3 and 4, it can be compared with Group 4. A simple difference method about 100% reflects the impact of the program, as there were some changes throughout the program, like alternative channels for obtaining the textbooks. Also, selection bias may exist in the real-life example like this, even if it is said to be conducted in a controlled environment. The authors conducted a level estimator and a difference in differences estimator by using generalized least squares. And these methods were conducted under the assumption of no selection bias and no attrition bias. No selection bias can be ensured by randomly selecting the schools that will receive the textbooks or the grants, and no attrition bias can be ensured by illustrating the insignificant differences between the dropout and transfer rates in textbook schools and comparison schools on the table 5 of the article. According to the column 1 of table 4, the impact of the textbook provision is statistically insignificant at the end of year 1. And also, we can see that there is no evidence of increasing impact by looking at the value in column 2. The differences between the pre-test and post-test scores illustrated in both column 3 and 4 even solidifies the argument that the program has almost no impact to the average test scores. Then here we come up with the question that why the authors has a conclusion that differs from the previous studies, even though there was no significant selection or attrition bias. This is because that the method that the authors use are different from the previous ones. The previous studies used retrospective estimates based on ordinary least squares, while the authors of this article used the difference in differences estimates based on generalized least squares. In case of homoscedasticity, estimates based on generalized least squares will give a better estimate. By using the retrospective estimates, the data shows that there are significant impacts to the scores in English and math and the overall grades. And this looks like that it goes along with the conclusion of the previous studies, but there are other interesting facts behind. With the result of cross-sectional retrospective estimates, the authors splitted the sample into quantiles to re-estimate the impact to the students in different grade levels. The significant impact on the fourth and fifth quantile suggests that the program has a positive impact only to the students who performed well on the pre-test. And there are other signs that these high-performing students are likely to be the elites of the society. By looking at the table 10, we could realize that the proportion of students did not enter secondary school is significantly lower, and the proportion that entered secondary school is significantly higher between the textbook schools and comparison schools, while there are no significant differences in the lower grades. And this ultimately solidifies the arguments that the textbook provision program did not impact on the test score of other students, and this raises question to the effectiveness of the program as a political policy in developing countries like Kenya. As a conclusion, the results shows that the current program is not effective in terms of increasing the average test scores, and thus it is not recommended. Instead, the authors suggest that the government should reallocate resources in modifying and developing their educational curriculum for the effectiveness of the public policy.